Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to episode 13 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flotat of mxdwn.com. So glad to see you all. Thanks for joining us. Tons of stuff going on. The year is in full swing already. All kinds of stuff happening on all different fronts. Some high consequence stuff, some silly stuff. But ultimately, let's get right into it. A lot of ground to cover this week. First of all, we talked to you last week a bit about the new HBO show, The Last of Us, which is based on the incredibly successful PlayStation series by the same name. This one stars Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal in the titular roles of Joel and Ellie, and effectively is a full length live action adaptation of what gamers have been loving for a long time. We talked to you about how it was the second biggest debut in the history of HBO. Well, that has another bigger accolade that it can call, which is that it is now the biggest growth week ever for the second week of a new HBO show. Whereas the first episode started at 4.7 million viewers, the second episode is 5.7, which makes it the biggest growth from week one to week two ever for any new HBO show. Already a massive hit, and starting to have some of the trickle effect that you would expect in the world of people being exposed to this game that might not have known about it before, where in the United Kingdom, the sales of the two existing titles based on the same story that is now what's being adapted in the show have had an incredible growth in sales just on the back of one episode, basically, which is that The Last of Us Chapter 1, which is the upcoming reimagining of the original game, grew over 238% just between last week and this week. And then The Last of Us Remastered, which is the original version that's been out for years, grew at a staggering 322%. Going to be hearing a lot about this show in the weeks to come. Be ready for everything that's going to happen, and it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch as it grows in popularity. Now, elsewhere, in the world of, I guess you could call it digital television. Now, we've covered a lot on our television section, the actual play show, Critical Role. Now, Critical Role is what you call a D&D show, which basically a group of voice actors are playing out a game of Dungeons and Dragons in real time, in a form of improvisational storytelling. And then effectively, they have over the years amassed a massive series of stories and a gigantic fan base to boot, usually like we are here right now today, broadcasting live on Twitch, and then, of course, rebroadcasting on YouTube in the weeks and the days after each episode is broadcast. What started as a group of friends just for fun became a show that on its own right became popular and then spawned its own company, where the various members of the group that perform this show every week, Matthew Mercer, Marisha Ray, Travis Willingham, Laura Bailey, Ashley Johnson, Liam O'Brien, and Taliesin Jaffe, who also co-own the company, became so popular, they formed a Kickstarter, raised something in the neighborhood of $11 million to create an animated feature based on the show that they've been working on and creating in front of millions of viewers for years live on the internet. That show is called The Legend of Vox Machina. It airs currently on Amazon Prime Video, and the first season, which has been out for about a year, is a staggering 100% perfect on Rotten Tomatoes, which is not something that happens very often where there's any kind of significant press for a piece of content. And it's an amazing, amazing score. Now, just this week, the second season of The Legend of Vox Machina started, which is based on, for fans of the show, everything that happened in their very first season, which aired over a period of 3 years. Now, since then, there was a second season of the show that's already come and finished, which featured an entirely different troupe of characters than what happened in the first season. And that show, affectionately, the group was called the Mighty Nine. Just like in the first season, it was called Vox Machina. Now, what's happened is Critical Role has announced that their partnership with Amazon has expanded. This animated feature for The Legend of Vox Machina, which has already been extended for a third season, now is going to be a whole new show called The Mighty Nine, based on the characters that were in the second season of the show. They also hinted in this announcement that there's going to be some measure of expanded content and programming beyond just the cartoons for The Legend of Vox Machina and The Mighty Nine. And what that means remains to be seen at this point. We don't have any additional details on that, but it's sure to be exciting because for something that was ostensibly created entirely through improvisational acting, it's a bit of a juggernaut. If you're not a person who's into D&D, if you're not a person who's in Dungeons and Dragons or actual play, it's something that's worth checking out. Certainly long-form content compared to conventional things you might be used to watching, where an average episode of Critical Role is something in the neighborhood of 4 hours long, sometimes as much as 5 hours long, because it's all people sitting around a table, rolling dice, improvising voices and characters and storyline. Elsewhere in the world of music, now this isn't something we typically would cover on This Week is Live or on Mixdown, but it's kind of fascinating, so it merits being discussed on some level. Justin Bieber, who was very, very young success in the world of pop music, now just 28 years old, and that's a big part of the reason this is interesting, has sold basically his entire catalog to Hypnosis Music. Now, this has become kind of a new trend in the world of music where publishing clearinghouses are buying out the rights of the material that artists have amassed throughout their career. And lots of big names have been doing things like this. Famously, Neil Young, part of his catalog, and then also Bob Dylan. But what's really fascinating about this is that this deal with Hypnosis Music includes all of his publishing copyrights, everything he owns in his master recordings, and any ancillary rights underneath that. His actual masters are still retained by Universal Music Group, but for what he sold, he got $200 million. Absolutely fascinating. And, doubly strange considering Justin Bieber's only 28 years old, making tons of money doing what he's doing, very successful where he is in music, very, very beloved by fans, and has been since he was ostensibly 16. So super bizarre to think that in this stage of his career, he would need that kind of money. And there's no real explanation as to why at this point. A lot of other artists, elderly in their years, they've been doing music a long time. They're not thinking of 20, 30 years of royalties coming up ahead of them. Ostensibly, Justin Bieber would have his whole life ahead of him, that he could be continuing making money on this. What might be $200 million now could be $1 billion 20 years from now. So who knows the exact reasoning why, but fascinating that at this age of his life, he was willing to take a buyout on everything that he's made so far. In sadder news, in the world of games, what began as kind of a smaller story in the world of Microsoft laying off 10,000 people, and maybe dubiously that affecting the world of Xbox and the associated game companies that Microsoft has been slowly building up over time, effectively now is starting to spread to a lot of different facets of the gaming industry and a lot of very curious reasoning behind it. Just in the last week, several companies, either in the gaming industry or in the gaming media, have announced layoffs almost out of nowhere. Staff, people in there believing the companies were profitable, finding out suddenly they didn't have a job and everyone in their department didn't. First and foremost, Riot Games had announced that trying to basically cut costs and rein in their budget, laid off 46 different people amidst the 10,000 jobs that Microsoft had announced that they were terminating across all sectors. Apparently, a lot of them came into their gaming industries, their sub-platforms, entities that they own. 343 Industries and Bethesda, chief among them. No numbers disclosed in terms of that, but apparently many, many people finding they got the boot kind of out of nowhere. Separately, in the world of media, the Washington Post, which had a subsection called Launcher, did a lot of really good video game reporting if you're looking for like real video game news. The entire Launcher sub-brand of the Washington Post, gone. Totally terminated, totally gone from everything that they're doing, no longer a part of their operations. And all of the people that were there, potentially, we don't have an exact number, but potentially up to 20 different jobs, all gone, basically out of nowhere. And then Giant Bomb and GameSpot, owned by the same parent company, about 40 to 50 jobs between both of the companies terminated pretty much out of nowhere. Giant Bomb and GameSpot have been a massive part of gaming journalism for a very, very long time. Elsewhere, in the world of movies, the 2023 Oscars announced their nominations. And, kind of keeping with what the times are, that not a lot of movies have been coming out. There's been a lot of prestige pictures compared to the years before the pandemic. And of course, the sad thing about the world as it stands right now is that a good portion of what the movie theater industry is doing is going through a massive contraction, and movie theaters across the country are going out of business. So there hasn't been a ton of amazing movies, but this particular year, the 10 nominees for Best Picture, and, thankfully to some people, because the Academy often skews away from movies that people really like and go for a very prestige picture kind of fare. But this year, there's a little bit of all kind of sides of what is there. There's All Quiet on the Western Front, the sequel to Avatar, Avatar: The Way of Water, The Banshees of Inisherin, Elvis, the Baz Luhrmann film, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, which leads all nominations with 11 nominations, probably the odds-on favorite for Best Picture at this point. The Fabelmans, Tar, starring Cate Blanchett, Top Gun Maverick, which was probably the surprise giant success of the year in terms of people just generally liking and enjoying a popcorn movie, and it also being a gigantic success almost 30 years from the original. Triangle of Sadness, and then Women Talking. lesser known in situations, basically actor in a leading role and actress in a leading role. Actor in a leading role nominations are going to Austin Butler for Elvis, Colin Farrell in the Banshees of Inisherin, Brendan Fraser in The Whale, which has been talked about kind of ad nauseum for months that would happen, Paul Mescal in Aftersun, and Bill Nye in Living. And then Best Actress in a leading role, Kate Blanchett, once again for Tar, Ana de Armas for Blonde. Can't say that we're a big fan of that particular movie. Kind of a torture fest if you haven't seen it. Andre Riseborough for To Leslie, and Andrea Riseborough, and then Michelle Williams for The Fablemans, and lastly, Michelle Yeoh for Everything Everywhere All at Once. And then lastly, and probably some of the most problematic and complicated news that's happened in some time. Now, you've probably heard in recent editions of this show how Pantera, the original 90s heavy metal band, one of the few to push through to basically become a gigantic success, unlike Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer, which were some of the only big metal bands to ever push through to arena level status. Pantera, who had broken up for a long time, and then their lead guitarist, the very famous Dimebag Darrell, had been tragically murdered while on stage playing a show with his other band, Damage Plan, following Pantera's breakup. And then, of course, Vinny Abbott, Dimebag Darrell Abbott's brother, passed away due to heart issues some years later. Pantera, the remaining two members, Rex Brown and Phil Anselmo, had reunited in some form of a celebration of Pantera, is what they've been calling it. I mean, for all points and purposes, it's Pantera on the bill. And effectively, even, basically opening for Metallica on some dates of Metallica's upcoming stadium tour, Pantera announced they were doing a reunion tour of sorts, and it was going to be a celebration of everything that was the band, basically coming back for many, many years of them not having been on the road because obviously they weren't getting along, and then Dimebag Darrell was murdered. And effectively, this was going to be their big reunion tour. And so in addition to Rex Brown and Philip Anselmo, the lineup was going to include Charlie Benante, the wonderful and incredible drummer from Anthrax, and then also Zakk Wylde, who is, was for a long time Ozzy Osbourne's chosen guitarist, and then also had his own band, Black Label Society, that he had done for many years. And effectively, those were going to be the four players, Zakk Wylde playing the role of what Dimebag Darrell did during his time as guitar player, and festival appearances were being announced left, right, and center. Well, kind of a curveball came up that I don't know that the band or many people who are fans kind of expected would come so quickly, but of course, detractors and people who aren't fans of Philip Anselmo kind of thought this might be coming. Essentially, there was this massive pushback, and they were scheduled to headline two festivals in Germany, the very famous, if you're not interested in the world, music festival scene, like us super huge music dorks are. There's two very, very big rock or heavy metal festivals in Germany. One of them is called Rock am Ring, and the other one's called Rock im Park. Very, very big festivals. The 3 days worth of bands playing all over the place. Tons of just big, big, big name stuff, and a lot of people seriously interested in rock and roll. Kind of in the way you don't often see here in America still anymore. So effectively, Pantera was scheduled to headline, and all of a sudden, Monday, it was basically announced they had been removed from the bill. And there's kind of a lot of speculation, but the little details that were available is coming out that people are believing the decision to remove them from the lineup was because of people's complaints about some of Phil Anselmo's past behavior. Now, this is worthy of a little bit of expansion. Phil Anselmo has always kind of been a little bit of a problematic figure in the world of heavy metal and has said and done things that has gotten him into trouble. It isn't entirely a new thing that Phil had said and done things that were a little bit problematic. But then, going back to 2016, there was an event staged at the Lucky Strike Lanes. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of like a high-end bowling lane here in Los Angeles. There was going to be an event called Dime Bash, and it was meant to be a tribute to Dimebag Darrell. So Phil Anselmo was like a super secret surprise guest. He came out at the end to perform a couple songs. Apparently, some people in the crowd were kind of taunting him, and then he thought it was a good idea to do something that resembled a white power gesture with his right arm. And depending on, judge for yourself, the videos out there, you can find it on YouTube of this moment in space where he did this and he behaved this way. Basically, it sounded like he somewhat affirmatively said white power. Now, if you weren't paying attention in 2016 to all this, if you weren't like super paying attention to the news, what unraveled because of this was a series of mea culpas. Phil Anselmo was basically widely apologizing for what he said. He's like, I didn't mean it that way. I was not trying to endorse white supremacy. And then he kind of made some kind of half-hearted explanation about, I don't know, that they were joking about white wine backstage and that he might have been referring to the white wine. I mean, it's not entirely clear what was and wasn't true. If you watch the video, you can see people taunting him and you can see him looking a little bit frustrated by that. But what he really meant, and is his apologies and sincere, who knows? I mean, it would be only speculation on that part. For a time in the short years after that, Phil's other very successful band that he's a lead singer of, Down, he left that band for a few years. They went on without him, but then before too long, he came back to Down, which is his other band with Pepper Keenan and everything. And so effectively, people kind of forgot about it. Things have kind of moved on. And now there's suddenly a big interest, and people are paying very close attention to, is Phil Anselmo or not a white supremacist? Now, a lot of people are coming to the conclusion, even though there hasn't been something very definitively stating that this is why Pantera has been removed from the bill. But not to be undone, another show they had scheduled, not in a festival in Vienna, Austria, has also been canceled just 2 days after that. And everyone's kind of drawing their own conclusions that that is indeed what's behind this. So effectively, you're going to see in the weeks to come a giant rising tide of interest in this one very small moment from 2016. Was Phil Anselmo endorsing white supremacy? Was he, pushing heinous views out to the world? Or was he just kind of an idiot and he said something that he probably shouldn't have said and, was just kind of being clumsy and thought he was being funny, but really doesn't believe that? Like I say, if you go back in time, there's a lot of apologies from him. There's a lot of mea culpas about, that he did the wrong thing and that he didn't mean that and it wasn't what it looked like. But right now, people are just kind of awakening to the notion of a very big, successful heavy metal band that maybe the dude from it said or did some things that people are super not keen with right now. So you're going to hear about, I would be guessing, a lot more cancellations on this, just on the basis of the suspicion of what was involved. So effectively, that's all our stories for this week. Just a kind of short little story, as in the typical format of this show, a short monologue for you. And, then we'll wrap it up and we'll be back here next week because I'm sure there's going to be just nothing but action as it has been this week. And we're going to see tons more craziness going in the next couple of weeks as we roll forward here. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about leadership. Now, for those of you that don't know me personally, or you haven't any experience talking to me, I've been in various capacities in my life, in charge of people or supervising people, and have had a lot of experience throughout my professional career leading people, not the least of which, of course, being Mixdown and being editor-in-chief of the publication. And effectively, it's something that I've spent probably an inordinate amount of time thinking about, learning about, trying to get better at. And I just wanted to share some of my own personal thoughts on leadership and trying to get the best of talented people, trying to work with good people, and trying to help them become the best kind of person that they can be. And I always tell people, because in Mixdown and what we do, we often end up appointing people to be editors in charge of other people, to help other people write or edit, and to basically help grow teams and focus content and everything. And I tend to say a lot of similar things to anybody that I'm trying to help, because, trying to explain to someone, here's how you be a great leader, it isn't exactly something you can just bottle. You can't just say, here's 3 tips to being a great leader and at helping people understand everything they need to know about how to, manage people and do well at it. It's a very complicated kind of energy, and it requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of understanding, and, it requires a lot of dialogue and discourse. But largely, I say to people, usually the best thing you can do is try to approach people where they are. Try to meet people with where their current level of skill is, and try to see if you can help them be just one step better. And one of the things that I always say is that I think good leadership isn't about just barking something at someone and say, hey, do this. I think great leadership is entirely a measure of how do you help someone know that you have their back? How do you help someone know that they can count on you for support? I always like to say to anybody within Mixdown that's in charge of other people that this isn't about you telling them what to do. This is about them knowing what they're supposed to do, and then in kind with that, you being there to support them and help them with whatever challenges they face in terms of getting things done. If you're having to come over the top and yell at someone and say, why are you failing? Chances are you as a leader have already failed. Things have already gone too far askew at that point. The objective really should be to help people understand, here's what we're looking for. Here's what you need to do. Here's what your goals are. Here's what's expected. And then try to be there for support for them. And then most importantly in that, to show them you're not going to let them down. All people, we all want leadership and guidance. We all want support, even me. me more than most. And effectively, the best thing you can do is to be there for them and to show them that if something goes wrong, if there's a mistake, if something doesn't happen the way it isn't that you're going to come crack them and yell at them. It is about, hey, we have a job to do. We've got things that we need to do here. And it is especially for us here at Mixdown, of course, because our job is to create content and to help people understand what's going on in the world. And the world is a big, crazy, insane place. And there's way too many things happening. And there's way too many things begging and demanding for your attention. So where does your attention need to go? What is it you need to know about your world or what things are happening in your world? Effectively, at the end of the day, I always like to say that it's our responsibility to be there for the readers, to be there to help the readers with what they need to know about what's going on in their world. It isn't about just here's our one way kind of like megaphone and bah, this is what we think. Love it, buy it. It's more about trying to capture what's happening out there and how do we help you know what's going on in the world around you. So, if we're a writer within a publication like ours, then the challenge is less about just blasting something forth, but more about thinking, well, we have a responsibility to those readers. This isn't a measure of, just do what we're saying and make what we're saying happen. This is a responsibility of if people are looking for information to help better understand their world, or of course, in the auspices of what we do, entertainment, this is about making sure that when they come looking, they get what they're looking for. So it's about our faith in ourselves. It's about each writer's faith in themselves as a person and in that relationship with delivering to the reader what it is that they're looking for. How do we make sure they get what they're looking for in that? So I always like to say this is really about working with anyone and just showing them you're not going to let them down. You're going to have their back. You're going to be there. You're going to be there to catch them if they fall, if there's a mistake. And hey, we got to keep going. We got to keep trying. We got to keep fighting. There's more to do. There's more to say. Let's do the best we can. And really, that's a lot of what guides me through almost every situation. Now, of course, as I grow older and, I go further and further away from the origins of this publication when I was, say, 22, effectively, the more that I realize that you've kind of got to have a lot of give and take with things as situations and problems arise. And boy, inevitably, they there's a nonstop barrage of things that can go wrong and things that will go wrong. It's really about having some flex. It's really about having the ability to allow for things to kind of wash over you, to ingest them, take a moment, have what they call emotional intelligence, and try to ask yourself what is probably the best path forward. Because at the end of the day, you're not really judged by were you able to bend somebody to do what you're looking for. You're judged by were you able to get it done. I've known a lot of really wonderful people in the arts throughout my life. And there's kind of a big dividing line in the different kinds of people I've known. And on the one hand, there are people who talk about things and then never really ever come through and deliver. And then there's, on the other hand, people who get things done. And really, in a world where you're leading people and you're trying to help get the best from talented people and to try to help them become the best kind of people they can in their art form, whatever that is, it's seriously much, much more about, hey, did we get it done? Did we accomplish what we were supposed to? Because, being brilliant all the live long day and effectively, having tons of great ideas, but never having anything to show for it doesn't really do anything for anybody. And at the end of the day, we're all measured by how good of a job can we do actually getting this through. And then, of course, the escalating bar of quality in that is, well, how good of a job did we do? But that first barrier, just did we get it done? Did we make it happen? Did we make it happen every day reliably? Therein lies the biggest challenge in terms of everything. So when you're sitting there leading a team of disparate people, different concerns, different places of life, different demands, different circumstances, and of course, in our case, because everything is just all people all over the country, it's, what are their own time constraints? Everybody's working on their own schedule. Some people very late at night, some people very early in the morning. But how do we bring that all together cohesively to accomplish things and get things done? And then that is an incredible equalizer, right? In terms of a lot of the problems you face, because then it becomes a simple question of, does this inhibit us from getting things done? Does this enable us to get things done? And that helps make a lot of decisions a lot easier, especially when the inevitable challenges come. But most of that just requires patience and faith and being involved in a dialogue. Hey, what are your problems? How can I help you? What are the difficulties that you're facing? Now, in my world, it means quite a few very long emails in terms of explaining certain complicated problems. But at the end of the day, it's always worth it. And I always say to anyone who I'm training, who's becoming a person in charge of people or trying to help bring people to the team, it's always a measure of how good of a job did you do helping them learn that they can believe in themselves, that they can do a better job, that effectively they are capable of being great and they are capable of being excellent. I like to say that I think it's an epidemic failure in Western civilization that a lot of people are treated and told as if nothing really matters. The care and attention you put into things doesn't really matter. And we always try to come from the approach of everything matters. That care and love that you put in what you do says everything about who you are. And if we're doing our job great as leaders, more so than, hey, did we get more pieces of content done? We help that person find that trust in themselves. We help that person understand that connection between that stick-to-itiveness, that care and that pride in what they're doing, and their ability to summon that skill. To me, that's more important than any one scoop or any one thing that we could report on. Of course, we can never really do enough if we're covering music, movies, games, and television. But at the end of the day, that's the most satisfying thing to me. When I look back at 20 plus years of doing something like this and to basically look at like what did it take to make this happen, is that anywhere we could, we tried to help a person unlock those talents and abilities, to help them unlearn this belief that nothing really mattered, and trying to help them understand that if they apply themselves, everything can be amazing. I can't do everything all the time, can't be everything to all people, but that ability is always, always there. And it's just a question of whether that person then has the drive within themselves, or maybe they have the drive within themselves to do that particular thing. A lot of people got to try a lot of things on the road to figuring out what is it that they really want. That's all for this week is live. Thanks again for joining us for this show. So glad to see you well. We're going to be here every week, all throughout 2023. Expect all kinds of surprises and twists and turns, maybe alternatives in this format as we continue to ramp up and get used to it, pump this through our various distribution channels. If you do not already, please subscribe to us on Twitch, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us everywhere there is social medias with @MXTWN. On YouTube, we are Mixed Down Video, in case you're confused. And effectively subscribe to us. Join us here every week. It'll probably usually be between 5 and 6 p.m. Pacific time where the show will go live, and then we'll post these episodes on YouTube a couple of days later. A big thanks to each and every one of you for watching the show every week, whatever it is you do, whether it's on YouTube, whether you're joining us live, or whether you see the various other places on social media that we post footage from this, whether that's on Twitter or on Instagram or on YouTube or in Shorts or any of the other crazy places that make up whatever the World Wide Web is now, at least in 2023. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you here again next week. Thanks again.